This lesson in chemistry, manufacturing, and controls is about process validation and evaluation. We present definition of terms and abbreviations, need for process validation, prospective validation, validation and manufacturers of new drugs, equipment qualification and process validation of new drugs. Lesson objectives. After this lesson you will be able to describe the content of Module 3 section on process validation for the manufacturing of a drug substance and drug product. Define the key terms relating to process validation. Be able to describe process validation protocol. Be able to describe master validation protocol. Learn the different stages of process validation.
Definition of terms and abbreviations. In this section I will present a few abbreviations and what they represent. I will also present some terminologies along with their meanings or applications in the pharmaceutical industry. Commonly used abbreviations. Please note the following abbreviations. The terms will be described later. PQ stands for Process Qualification. IQ stands for Installation Qualification. OQ stands for Operational Qualification. Critical Process Parameter. This is a parameter which, if not controlled, will contribute to the variability of the end product. Equipment Qualification. Equipment qualification involves studies which establish with confidence that the process equipment and ancillary systems are capable of consistently operating within established limits and tolerances. Such studies must include equipment specifications, installation qualification, and operational qualification of all major equipment to be used in the manufacture of commercial-scale batches. Equipment qualification should simulate actual production conditions, including worst-case conditions. Installation Qualification. This is the documented act of demonstrating that process equipment and ancillary systems are appropriately selected and correctly installed. Major equipment. This is a piece of equipment which performs significant processing steps in the sequence of operations required for fabrication and packaging of drug products. Some examples of major equipment include tablet compression machines, mills, blenders, fluid bed dryers, heaters, drying ovens, tablet coaters, encapsulators, fermenters, centrifuges, etc. Master Production Document. This is a document that includes specifications for raw material, packaging material, and for packaged dosage form, master formula, sampling procedures and critical processing-related standard operating procedures, whether or not they are specifically referenced in the master formula. Process Qualification. It is the phase of validation dealing with sampling and testing at various stages of the manufacturing process to ensure that product specifications are met. Process Validation. Process validation involves establishing documented evidence with a high degree of assurance that a specific process will consistently produce a product meeting its predetermined specifications and quality characteristics. Validation. It is the documented act of demonstrating that any procedure, process, and activity will consistently lead to the expected results. It includes the qualification of systems and equipment. Validation Master Plan. Validation Master Plan is an approved written plan of objectives and actions stating how and when a company will achieve compliance with the GMP requirements regarding validation.
Who needs process validation? In this section we will discuss a few regulatory requirements for process validation. Some validation guidelines in Canada. Validation is the documented act of demonstrating that any procedure, process, and activity will consistently lead to the expected results. Includes the qualification of systems and equipment. There are several documents from Health Canada which you can read about process validation. They include Cleaning Validation, Process Validation, Form Fill Seal for drugs, Process Validation, Gaseous Sterilization for pharmaceuticals, Process Validation, Moist Heat Sterilization for pharmaceuticals. Countries that require specific validation information in Module 3. USA requires Method Validation Package. EU requires process validation scheme for the drug product. Who needs process validation in Canada? Distributors of drugs fabricated, packaged, labeled and tested in Canada should have complete process validation information, on an individual product basis, when not available at the fabricator's site. Importers in Canada need process validation. Importers of drugs fabricated, packaged or labeled and tested in non-mutual recognition agreement countries should provide product-specific process validation. What importers in Canada need to provide? Importers mentioned in the previous slide should provide documentation showing the following: the validation approach utilized by the fabricator, prospective, concurrent or retrospective, the reference numbers and dates of approval for the master formula including packaging, the process validation protocol, the process validation studies, the validation of the test methods, the lot numbers involved and the dates of completion of these studies, a certified copy of the approved conclusions of the product validation studies.
Process validation and manufacturers of new drugs. In this section I will present briefly the approach to process validation by manufacturers of new drugs. Phases of validation. The activities relating to validation studies may be classified into 3 phases. These are Phase 1, Phase 2 and Phase 3. Let's look at Phase 1. 1. This phase covers all activities relating to product research and development, formulation, pilot batch studies, scale-up studies, transfer of technology to commercial scale batches, establishing stability conditions, storage and handling of in-process and finished dosage forms, equipment qualification, installation qualification, master production documents, operational qualification and process capability. This phase applies to developers of new drugs. Phase 2. This phase may also be called process qualification phase and designed to verify that all established limits of the critical process parameters are valid, that satisfactory products can be produced even under the worst-case conditions.
At Phase 3. This phase requires frequent review of all process-related documents including validation audit reports to assure that there have been no changes, deviations, failures, modifications to the production process, and that all standard operating procedures have been followed, including change control procedures. The validation team should also assure that no changes/deviations have occurred that have not resulted in requalification and revalidation.
Types of process validation. Process validation may take the form of prospective validation, executed before the process is put into commercial use. Concurrent validation, used in special cases such as with orphan drugs. Retrospective validation, acceptable for well-established detailed processes. Revalidation. In the next section we will present more about prospective validation.
I will describe when prospective validation is most appropriate and what is required for it to be implemented. I will talk about validation protocol and validation master plan in relation to prospective validation. Prospective validation is conducted prior to the distribution of either a new product or a product made under a modified production process, where the modifications are significant and may affect the product's characteristics. Prospective validation is a pre-planned scientific approach and includes the initial stages of formulation development, process development, setting of process specifications, developing and process tests, sampling plans, designing of batch records, defining raw material specifications, completion of pilot runs, transfer of technology from scale-up batches to commercial-size batches, listing major process equipment and environmental controls. Validation requires a pre-approved protocol. Validation protocol is a written plan of action stating how process validation will be conducted. It specifies who will conduct the various tasks and define testing parameters, sampling plans, testing methods and specifications. Will specify product characteristics and equipment to be used. The protocol must also specify the minimum number of batches to be used for validation studies, the acceptance criteria, and who will sign, approve, disapprove the conclusions derived from such a scientific study. The validation protocol provides a synopsis of what is hoped to be accomplished. The protocol should list the selected process and control parameters, state the number of batches to be included in the study, and specify how the data, once assembled, will be treated for relevance. The date of approval by the validation team should also be noted. The validation protocol should include scope, objective, description of process, identification of critical parameters, description of analytical methods, documentation, conclusion, approval, final validation report. Slide 34. In the case where a protocol is altered or modified after its approval, appropriate reasoning for such a change must be documented. The validation protocol should be numbered, signed and dated, and should contain as a minimum the following information: objectives, scope of coverage of the validation study, validation team membership, their qualifications and responsibilities, type of validation, prospective, concurrent, retrospective, revalidation, number and selection of batches to be on the validation study, a list of all equipment to be used, their normal and worst-case operating parameters, outcome of IQ/OAK for critical equipment, requirements for calibration of all measuring devices. The protocol should also include critical process parameters and their respective tolerances, description of the processing steps, copy of the master documents for the product, sampling points, stages of sampling, methods of sampling, sampling plans, statistical tools to be used in the analysis of data, training requirements for the processing operators. The protocol should also include validated test methods to be used in process testing and for the finished product, specifications for raw and packaging materials and test methods, forms and charts to be used for documenting results, format for presentation of results, documenting conclusions, and for approval of study results. A validation master is also required. A validation master plan is a document that summarizes the company's overall philosophy, intentions, and approaches to be used for establishing performance adequacy. The validation master plan should be agreed upon by management. Validation in general requires meticulous preparation and careful planning of the various steps in the process. In addition, all work should be carried out in a structured way according to formally authorized standard operating procedures. All observations must be documented and where possible must be recorded as actual numerical results. The validation master plan should provide an overview of the entire validation operation, its organizational structure, its content and planning. The main elements of it being the list of the items to be validated and the planning schedule. All validation activities relating to critical technical operations, relevant to product and process controls within a firm should be included in the validation master plan. It should include all prospective validations as well as revalidation as is appropriate. The validation master plan should be a summary document and should therefore be brief, concise, and clear. It should not repeat information documented elsewhere but should refer to existing documents such as policy documents, SOPs, validation protocols, and reports. The format and content should include introduction, validation policy, scope, location and schedule, organizational structure, personnel responsibilities, plant/process/product description, rationale for inclusions or exclusions and extent of validation, specific process considerations that are critical, and those requiring extra attention. The format and content should include list of products, processes, systems to be validated, summarized in a matrix format, revalidation activities, actual status and future planning, key acceptance criteria, documentation format, reference to the required SOPs, time plans of each validation project and sub-project.
Equipment qualification involves different stages. It begins with protocol development and approval, and then installation and operation qualification. In this section I will present the different stages of qualification along with activities that may be associated with each stage. Qualification in general may be defined as action of proving that any premises, systems and items of equipment work correctly and actually lead to the expected results. Equipment qualification must have a qualification protocol which should provide details about system, scope, test procedure, and acceptance criteria. Installation qualification, on the other hand, involves establishing with confidence that all major processing, packaging equipment and additional systems are in conformance with installation specifications, equipment manuals, schematics and engineering drawings. This stage of validation includes examination of equipment design, determination of calibration, maintenance and adjustment requirements. Installation and operational qualification. The detail and scope of a qualification exercise is in many respects related to the complexity of the equipment involved and the critical nature of that equipment with respect to the quality of the final product. Installation and operational qualification exercises assure through appropriate performance tests and related documentation that equipment, secondary systems and subsystems have been commissioned correctly. The end results are that all future operations will be reliable and within prescribed operating limits. The basic principles of installation and operational qualification are: equipment be correctly installed in accordance with an installation plan, requirements for calibration, maintenance and cleaning be covered and approved standard operating procedures. Tests be conducted to assure that equipment is operating correctly, under normal and worst-case conditions. Operator training requirements pertaining to new equipment be conducted and documented. At various stages in a validation exercise there is need for protocols, documentation, procedures, equipment, specifications and acceptance criteria for test results. All these need to be reviewed, checked and authorized. It would be expected that representatives from the appropriate professional disciplines such as research and development, manufacturing, quality control and quality assurance be actively involved in these undertakings with the final authorization given by a validation team or the quality assurance representative. For complicated or large pieces of equipment, a pharmaceutical manufacturer may elect to undertake a pre-delivery check of the equipment at the supplier's assembly facility. This pre-delivery check cannot substitute for the installation qualification. However, it is acknowledged that the checks conducted and documented at this stage may duplicate a number of the checks conducted at the IQ stage, thus leading to a reduction in the scope of the IQ checks. The conduct of an operational qualification should follow an authorized protocol. The critical operating parameters for the equipment and systems should be identified at the OQ stage. The plans for the OQ should identify the studies to be undertaken on the critical variables, the sequence of those studies, and the measuring equipment to be used and the acceptance criteria to be met. Studies on the critical variables should include a condition or a set of conditions encompassing upper and lower processing and operating limits referred to as worst-case conditions. The completion of a successful OQ should allow the finalization of operating procedures and operator instructions documentation for the equipment. This information should be used as the basis for training of operators in the requirements for satisfactory operation of the equipment. The completion of satisfactory IQ and OQ exercises should permit a formal release of the equipment for the next stage in the process validation exercise as long as calibration, cleaning, preventive maintenance and operator training requirements have been finalized and documented. Requalification. Modifications to or relocation of equipment should follow satisfactory review and authorization of the documented change proposal through the change control procedure. This formal review should include consideration of requalification of the equipment. Minor changes or changes having no direct impact on final or in-process product quality should be handled through the documentation system of the preventative maintenance program. It would normally be expected that process validation be completed prior to the distribution of a finished product that is intended for sale. Revalidation provides the evidence that changes in a process and/or the process environment that are introduced do not adversely affect process characteristics and product quality. Documentation requirements will be the same as for the initial validation of the process. Periodic review and trend analysis should be carried out at scheduled intervals. Revalidation is necessary when situations change as to affect the product quality. The following are examples of some of the changes that may require revalidation. Changes in raw materials, which includes physical properties such as density, viscosity, particle size distribution, and moisture, among others that may affect the process or product. Changes in the source of active raw material manufacturer. Changes in packaging material, primary container/closure system. Changes in the process such as mixing time, drying temperatures and batch size. Changes in the equipment such as addition of automatic detection system. Changes in the manufacturing facility. Variations revealed by trend analysis such as process drifts. A decision not to perform revalidation studies must be fully justified and documented.
Now that you understand process validation, we will describe how to compile some sections of Module 2 and Module 3 of the Common Technical Document from studies completed by the manufacturer of the drug product or drug substance. We will focus on studies related to process validation reports as well as related documents. The section numbers are based on M4Q guidance document. We have used them to determine where the information will be placed in the document. You can also refer to M4Q sections for more information. This section relates to the manufacturer of the drug substance. You provide the name and address of the manufacturer. In most cases, the information is in the drug master file, and you can simply refer to DMFZs for information regarding chemistry manufacturing and controls used in the production of drug substance ABC. The information you provide should be the same as in Module 3. You should provide a brief description of the manufacturing process. You should include, for example, starting materials, critical steps, and reprocessing, as well as the controls that are intended to result in the routine and consistent production of materials of appropriate quality. Also provide a flow diagram of the process as provided in Module 3. If the drug substance is of biological origin, provide a description of the source and starting material and raw materials used in the manufacture of the drug substance, as described in Module 3. Provide a discussion on the selection and justification of critical manufacturing steps, process controls, and acceptance criteria. Highlight critical process intermediates as described in Module 3. Provide a description of process validation as described in Module 3. Provide also a brief summary of major manufacturing changes made throughout development and conclusions from the assessment used to evaluate product consistency as described in Module 3. This section relates to the manufacturer of the drug product and the dosage form. You provide the name and address of the manufacturer and the dosage form. The manufacturer is usually a pharmaceutical company. In most cases, the information is in the drug master file, and you can simply refer to DMFZs for information regarding chemistry manufacturing and controls used in the production of drug product DEF. The information you provide should be the same as in Module 3. Provide a brief description of the manufacturing process and the controls that are intended to result in the routine and consistent production of product of appropriate quality. Provide a flow diagram, as provided in Module 3. Provide a brief description of the process validation as described in Module 3. As the drug substance may be a chemical substance or a biologic or sterile, different types of information is required. For all drug substances, the manufacturing process for the manufacture of the drug substance should be well described. In addition, process validation and/or evaluation studies for aseptic processing and sterilization should be included. If the drug substance is based on biotechnology, specific type of information is required. Sufficient information should be provided on validation and evaluation studies to demonstrate that the manufacturing process, including reprocessing steps, is suitable for its intended purpose and to substantiate selection of critical process controls, operational parameters and in-process tests, and their limits for critical manufacturing steps such as cell culture, harvesting, purification, and modification. The plan that was used to conduct the study should be described and the results, analysis and conclusions from the executed study or studies should be provided. The analytical procedures used and corresponding validation should be cross-referenced to the relevant sections of Module 3 or provided as part of justifying the selection of critical process controls and acceptance criteria. Manufacturing of the drug product. In this section you should provide a flow diagram giving the steps of the manufacturing process and showing where materials enter the process. The critical steps and points at which process controls, intermediate tests or final product controls are conducted should be identified. Provide a narrative description of the manufacturing process including packaging that represents the sequence of steps undertaken, and the scale of production should also be provided. Novel processes or technologies and packaging operations that directly affect product quality should be described with a greater level of detail. Equipment should, at least, be identified by type such as tumble blender, inline homogenizer, and in working capacity, where relevant. Steps in the manufacturing process should have the appropriate process parameters identified, such as time, temperature, or pH. Related numeric values can be presented as an expected range. You should justify numeric ranges for critical steps in Module 3. In certain cases, environmental conditions such as low humidity for an effervescent product should be stated. If for any reason reprocessing has been required, proposals for the reprocessing of materials should be justified, and any data to support this justification should be either referenced or filed in Module 3. In this section, provide tests performed at the critical steps identified in Module 3 of the manufacturing process and acceptance criteria with justification, including experimental data, to ensure that the process is controlled. Intermediates. Provide information on the quality and control of intermediates isolated during the manufacturing process, if any. In this section you need to provide the name of the manufacturer, address and dosage form. Your primary focus is process validation for the new drug you want to be licensed by the regulatory agencies. You should provide description, documentation, and results of the validation and/or evaluation studies for critical steps or critical assays used in the manufacturing process, such as validation of the sterilization process or aseptic processing or filling.
Review the following common technical document summary for completeness, compliance and format. Description of manufacturing process and process controls. Control of materials. Control of critical steps and intermediates. Process validation and evaluation. Drug product. Review the following common technical document sections for completeness, compliance and format. Manufacturer's name, dosage form. Description of manufacturing process and process controls. Controls of critical steps and intermediates. Process validation and/or evaluation. You have come to the end of the presentation. Thank you and see you in the next lesson.